Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. The last video that I filmed was all about fall fantasy book recommendations. And if you haven't watched it, I will link it on the screen and in my description box down below. But in addition to having fantasy books that I think you should read in the fall, there's also some fantasy books that I want to read this fall. And so I thought it would be fun to film kind of like a part 2 to that video talking about my fall fantasy TBR. I personally think that fall is the perfect time to start a new fantasy series, or honestly just get like swept away by a fun magical standalone book. And there are so many books that I want to read this fall. I know it's totally unrealistic to read all of them, but we're going to talk about all my tops right here, right now, so let's just do it. Quite a few of the books that I'm going to talk about today I don't actually have physical copies of yet. Some of them are on Kindle Unlimited, some of them, again, I just haven't gotten, and then some of them I do have. So let's start out with this pile. So the first fantasy book that I want to read this fall is The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is probably one of the most famous fantasy books of all time, dare I say. This series is just so popular among so many different age groups, and I actually filmed a video recently where a wheel, like a TBR wheel, picks my September TBR, and this book got chosen. So hopefully I'll be reading this book sooner rather than later. I'm currently reading A Court of Silver Flames, and that book is so giant, it's taking up a good chunk of my September, but we're gonna do our best to get to this one. I'm really excited about this. I've had it for a little while now, so yeah. First fall fantasy book that I want to read is The Fellowship of the Ring. The next book that I want to read this fall might be my number one fantasy book that I've been most excited to read. And that book is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. This book, I literally have not heard a single person say anything bad about this series. The Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy is about this girl named Evangeline, and I believe she's in love with someone, and the guy that she's in love with ends up getting engaged, and she's heartbroken, and so she goes and makes a deal with the Prince of Hearts, and it sends her on this whole journey. I don't know. I feel like it's good that I don't know too much about this. Also, I wanted to throw in here that I've watched quite a few people do reading vlogs about this series, and the third book is coming out at the end of this year. And when people finish the second book, they're unwell. They need to know what happens next and it's not out yet. So I've intentionally been kind of waiting to get to this book because I don't want to go through that pain. So yeah, I'm excited, but I am holding off just a little longer until the third book comes out to start this. Okay, this next book is a bit of a reread, and by a bit, I mean completely a reread, but it's still a book that I want to read this fall season. I mentioned this in my last video, and that is the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. Now, I've actually only read about half of this series. I went through a fantasy binge a while ago where I was reading so much fantasy that I kind of got to a point where I needed to mix it up. And then by the time I was ready to go back to fantasy, I'd forgotten everything that happened in this series up to the point that I got to, if that makes any sense. So now I really want to go back and reread the first few books in this series so I can continue with it and finish the whole thing. But this book follows a girl named Selena who is known for being an incredible assassin, and she ends up getting recruited by the prince of this land. And basically she comes to find that the king of their realm, the king of where they live, is looking for his own assassin, but he doesn't want just any assassin. He wants the best assassin. So he hosts this low-key little competition where people in his court bring in who they think the best assassin is, and they're all basically fighting to be his assassin. So I don't think I described that very well, but it's really, really good. I absolutely loved this book when I read it the first time, and I've been craving reading this, so this is definitely a goal that I have this fall. Okay, the last of the physical copies that I have is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. I also mentioned this one in my last video. This is a trilogy, and I've read the first two books and half of the third. Same thing happened here. I kind of needed a break and then never found my way back to this series, but it's so good, you guys. This is honestly one of the best fantasy series I've ever read, and I really want to read it again for the fall season. And this series is about this world where there's 4 different Londons, kind of like parallel universes, but not in the sci-fi way, very much in like a fantasy way. And each of these Londons has varying amounts of magic in them. So there's Grey London, which is our London, no magic. And then there's White London, Red London, and Black London. And the story follows 2 main characters. One of them, his name is Kel, and he is a very rare kind of magician called an Antari. And so basically he can move between the Londons, which again is very rare. Very few people can do that. And then we also follow a girl named Delilah Bard, who is living in Grey London, no magic. She's like a thief. And she ends up getting wrapped up in Kel's little adventure. Oop, there are some things flying around outside. And again, I really want to reread this series in the fall time because it just brings back all the like fun fall vibes. So yeah, Darker Shade of Magic. I really want to reread this. Okay, now we're moving on to some of the book series that I don't actually have physical copies of that I want to read. I don't think I've read any of these before, actually. So the next book that I really, really want to read this fall season is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, I believe. And Divine Rivals, this book has been so popular for probably like 2 months now. Divine Rivals, my understanding is it's also very much a fantasy story that takes place in a world where the gods are at war with each other. And we're following these 2 people. And I believe they're academic rivals or work rivals. They're rivals in some capacity, hence the name of the story. And they end up writing these letters to each other. And I think the letters are magical in some way, and it's a love story between them. And I know that the second book for that series is also coming out this year, and everyone that I've seen read this book absolutely loves it. And it's just every time I hear about it, it moves closer and closer to the top of my TBR. So I'm really excited to get to that one, and I'm pretty sure it's on Kindle Unlimited. I'm like out of breath talking about these books. I'm just so excited. The next one, while we're on the hype train, I do really need to read Fourth Wing. Sometimes when books get super hyped up, it causes me to like not want to read them, if that makes sense. Like I'm scared that because of all the hype, I'll have really high expectations and then be disappointed. And I don't know, I just hadn't gotten around to Fourth Wing yet. Plus, sometimes I like kind of know what I want to read in the next few weeks. So then when a book gets really popular, it would like throw off my reading plan. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but there's a reason I haven't read this yet. Fourth Wing is like a high stakes fantasy. I know it's really fast paced. There's a heavy romance plot in it, and it has dragons. And I'm pretty sure the main girl, the main character of the story, she's smaller and weaker and wants to do something in like academia or something like not violent, but it turns out that her mom forces her to go to this academy to become a dragon rider, I think. And so in this academy, basically you train and compete, and basically the only ways out is like dying or completing the training, I think. Something like that. But again, it's so highly rated on Goodreads. Everyone's obsessed with it, so I would love to read that this fall. The last book that I want to throw into this video is the X Hex series. I don't actually know if that's what the series is called, but 2 years ago I read the X Hex by Erin Sterling, and I wasn't like obsessed with the story itself, but the book just put me in the best Halloween mindset that I think I've ever been in. Like the ambiance was so perfect for Halloween. And she came out with the second book in that series called The Kiss Curse, I believe last year. And I didn't actually ever get to it. So I would honestly really love to read both of those books in October more specifically, and they have very strong, like, I don't know, like if you guys have ever watched Halloween Town, or like not Hocus Pocus, but like the vibes that Halloween Town and Hocus Pocus give off, like that extreme Halloween, like cutesy vibe, that's kind of how I would describe this, or I guess not the series, but the X Hex. I also don't really remember the plot, but I remember the vibes, and I'm looking for those vibes again this Halloween season. It's a romance. It was really fun. And honestly, yeah, I would just love to read the next book in that series. I think that about covers my fall fantasy TBR. Again, I'm such a fantasy girl. Like, I just love reading fantasy books throughout the whole year, but specifically in the fall time. If you guys want another video talking about like fall book recommendations in general, or like my fall TBR that isn't specifically fantasy, I definitely read a whole lot of other genres besides fantasy. Definitely let me know. And I think that's it for today's video. I hope you guys are having a great day and a great reading month, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, you guys. Bye.